Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Institute of Politics Speaker Series event, Class, Currency, and Capital. Scott Galloway and David Axelrod in conversation. This event is a continuation of the IOP's Divided We Stand 2025 initiative, seeking to explore the differences dividing us. My name is Eduardo Ribeiro. I'm a freshman in the college, majoring in economics and political science, born and raised in Brazil. At the IOP, I served as Fellows Ambassador for Pritzker Fellow and former U.S. Senator from Montana, John Tester, as well as the president of the College Republicans. I came to America 6 months ago with the goal of achieving the American dream. I was drawn to a shining city on the hill, but arriving here, I realized that although it still shines bright, there's a lot of work to be done. Wealth inequality remains a barrier to the American dream, as hardworking families struggle to put food on the table, send their kids to college, and keep up with rising costs while wages lag behind inflation. Political polarization has intensified in recent years, fragmenting our society into competing camps and breaking apart what I most admire about the US, the ability of Americans to work together to solve common problems in a unified nation. Tonight, we're joined by two speakers who are here to help unpack the class, gender, and other crucial divides that continue to polarize American politics today. David Axelrod is a renowned American political strategist and former senior advisor to President Barack Obama. He's also the founding director of the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics and a senior political commentator for CNN. Scott Galloway is a professor at NYU Stern School of Business and a New York Times bestselling author. Best known for his best-selling books, including The Algebra of Happiness and his podcast, the Prof G Pod, Mr. Galloway addresses important issues in America today, from higher education to wealth inequality and politics. You can also hear his voice in the new season of White Lotus. Some quick housekeeping rules before we begin. First, please silence your cell phones. Second, when it's time for Q&A, a microphone will be placed in the audience, and priority will be first given to students. Finally, please make sure to check upcoming IOP events, such as Is RFK Jr. Right About Our Food System, which will take place next Tuesday, April 8th at 5:30 p.m. in Bond Chapel, and Is FEMA Flop? The Ugly Politics of Natural Disasters, which will take place on April 15th, 5:30 p.m. right here in Illinois. You can register for both these events and many others at the IOP websites. Now, please join me in welcoming to the stage David Axelrod and Scott Galloway.
Is that your walk-on music?
That's me. Yeah, that's my motto.
Wow. Nice crowd. Who needs Kara Swisher, right?
That's right.
You can build a crowd on your own.
That's right.
Welcome.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Thanks for having.
Yeah.
Me and my son are here. We just did the campus tour. Beautiful campus. Never been here before. Extraordinary. I trust you recognize how fortunate you are, and you're going to remember this the rest of your life. Hey, my close friend. Best friend since the 4th grade, Adam Markman.
Wow.
Anyways, that's all I got.
That's okay. Well, let's start there.
Sure.
Because this is a school that believes in free expression. So
Sure.
I'm going to test it by asking you about elite institutions, because
Sure.
I know you have strong feelings about it.
Sure.
And if I'm removed in the middle of this, then you'll know that we've lessened our commitment to free expression.
There you go.
But right across the street, the reason I wanted to start here was because
Yeah.
I listened to your conversation with Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson the other
Yeah.
day on their book Abundance.
Yeah.
And you spoke, and I've heard you before on this, very passionately about higher education.
Sure.
And it is odd. We're across the street from a beautiful cathedral, as it were, to John D. Rockefeller, who formed this campus, who started this, whose money funded this university. So there is that whole robber baron with a conscience thing.
Yeah.
But the bigger thing is, you have talked about what has happened to higher education in this country. So let them have it.
Well, I like to make it a practice to offend the audience I'm in front of. if you had a drug, and if you took this drug, it made you dramatically less likely to kill someone else, harm yourself, made you less likely to be obese, made you more likely to get married, made you more likely to stay married, much less likely to get diabetes, extended your life expectancy by 5 to 7 years, made you much more likely to get involved in nonprofits. Would you hoard that drug? That's what you're doing.
Or would you share it with the president?
That's what higher ed is. Higher ed sets the tone for America. We've become a rejectionist, exclusionary LVMH nation, led by higher education. Your endowment is $11.5 billion. Your freshman class is the size of what a good Starbucks serves every day. Is that what your aim is? And people say, well, it's about the brand. When I applied to UCLA, you know what the admissions rate was? 76%. You know what it is today? This year it'll be 7%. Higher ed is more from a place where we want to give the bottom 90 a chance of being in the top 10 to a place where you want to identify two cohorts, the children of rich people or the freakishly remarkable, and then hope you turn them into billionaires so they can build more of these buildings. Is that what America's about? I graduated from high school with a 3.1 GPA and 1130 on the SAT, and I was one of the 24% that didn't get into UCLA. And I was I was raised by a single immigrant mother who lived and died as secretary. And I didn't get in, so I started installing shelving. I was making 18 bucks an hour because it was a union job, and I thought that was a lot of money. And I remember this vividly. I came home one day, and I was just so upset. You know, my whole life people had told me I was creative, and I was smart, and funny, and the rest of it. And I said to my mom, it just kind of broke down. I'm like, this is my life? And there's nothing wrong with vocational work, but I thought I was going to go to college. And she said, well, is there something we could do? And I found out there was something called an appeal process, and I appealed to UCLA. And people said to me, I remember this, well, why wouldn't you apply to Michigan or Duke? Just get on a plane and go down there and tell them your story. And people don't realize, you can, if you grew up with some money, I think you can have empathy for poor people, or I was the upper, lower middle class, I'd say. But you don't really know what it's like. And people would say, well, go to Michigan, someone said, or go to Indiana and just show up and apply. I'm like, I didn't have a credit card. I wasn't going to get on a plane. I was either going to live at home or I wasn't going to college. And not getting into UCLA meant I wasn't going to college. Anyways, I applied, and the truth has a nice ring to it. I said, I'm installing shelving, and I really have bigger plans. And some guy in the admissions department called me, and I remember this the rest of my life. He said, you're not qualified, but you're a native son of California, and we're going to give you a shot. And because they had a lot of seats relative to the number of applicants, they had the bandwidth to let in unremarkable kids. And this is a flex, and I'm going to make it. In the last 5 years, I've given $16 million back to Berkeley and UCLA. So it's worked out for all of us. Because here's the thing, no institution or individual can recognize or be the arbiter of greatness in an 18-year-old. Higher ed should be about giving as many kids a shot as possible. So Chicago's actually, I did some research, Chicago's actually better than most places. You've increased your enrollments by 30% over the last 10 years. You've tripled them in the last 40 years. By the way, your endowment's gone from $800 million to $11.5 billion. I just interviewed the president of Dartmouth. They have an $8 billion endowment, and they let in 500 kids, and they haven't increased their enrollment, and they're in the middle of goddamn nowhere. What is the constraint there? They could get faculty easily. They have more than enough money. They could go to 5,000 in 5 years. They're not space constrained. They're not faculty constrained. They're constrained by a new zeitgeist in America that says we want to be LVMH. We want to be America. The faculty and the alumni love a rejectionist culture. Once you get a house, you decide you don't want to issue more housing permits because a scarcity of college diplomas from elite institutions or good institutions and new houses means the incumbents who already have a college degree and already own a home, the value of those things go up. And so what do we have? We have an America that's basically, you're either freakishly remarkable or you're the kid of somebody rich. If you're in the top 1%, income earning, a kid in a top 1% household, you're 77 times more likely to get into an elite school than the bottom 99. Is that what America's about? So I believe that if you are not growing your freshman class faster than population growth and you have an endowment over $1 billion, I think you should lose your tax-free status. Because you're no longer a public servant, you're a hedge fund with classes. By the way, I also thought Biden's plan to relieve student debt was a terrible idea. I think it creates moral hazard. The key to our ability to raise inflation faster than, or tuition faster than inflation is based on two things. This artificial scarcity we manufacture. We could let in more people. Hermes does this. Those bags are not hard to produce. They purposely choke supply, so does Panerai, to create the illusion of scarcity, such that it creates aspirational luxury value and you can raise tuition faster than inflation. And that's been the strategy of higher ed, such that faculty stands up as they do at my institution, and when the dean says we rejected 89% of applicants, you know what we do? We applaud. That's like the head of a homeless shelter bragging he or she turned away 9 in 10 people last night. Now, I'm not suggesting you need to let in everybody, but UCLA wasn't exactly a Joey Bag of Donuts brand when it was letting in 76%. So what is the point of having all of this money and this institution that does so much good for people, produces so much health, so much prosperity, and then sequestering it? 4% admissions rate? What the actual fuck? Like is that what the founding fathers wanted here? To create an Hermes bag in the form of an academic institution? Back to you, David.
Yeah, thanks. I've been doing this a long time, and I have a gift for drawing people out. So I think you just saw it. But in a minute, we're going to give someone from admissions rebuttal time. But you've written one book or two since this book.
A couple, and I just submitted a manuscript for my new one.
And I don't want to give short shrift to those, but I had read this. We did a podcast a couple of years ago. This book had just come out. I read it. It's called Adrift, America in 100 Charts. One of the subjects was higher education and what's happened since World War II to now to kind of constrict the opportunity. But I want you generally to talk about working class people in this country, because the question always comes up, well, why would they vote for Donald Trump?
Sure.
Why would these people vote? And you read these charts and you think, oh, well, I can see why people are alienated, why they're a little...
Yep.
And so I want you to talk about this. By the way, the book is called Adrift, and here's the Lady Liberty up to her waist in water. Where's the water now? Is it, as it?
Yeah, she's drowning. Yeah.
But anyway, go ahead.
Look, I'm living in London, and it's difficult to recognize America. I've been there the last 2.5 years. The things I just took for granted are being challenged, and it feels very alien. And the first thing you have to do to address a problem is to diagnose what happened. And I've said this publicly, and Bannon said I should be sued. I think we elected an insurrectionist and a rapist. And we all sit here and you know, clutch our pearls and say, how did this happen, and get angry. And I'm like, well, first thing we have to do is diagnose the problem. How did this happen? And I think that we are misdiagnosing, we're not even getting to the core of the problem. And I think this is what happened. This was supposed to be an election or a referendum on women's rights. I'm not saying what should have happened, I'm saying what I believe happened. Women's rights did not show up. We as Democrats thought, oh, everyone's going to be outraged about this. Didn't show up. What showed up was testosterone. And if you look at the three groups that swung hardest from blue to red from 2020 to 2024, it's three groups. Latinos, who don't want to be identified as an identity. Like Mexican Americans in Southern California have much different priorities than Cuban Americans in Florida. And even identifying them as a group pisses them off. So when the Democratic Party starts talking about we need to get Latinos back, right then you failed, because they don't identify through their identity. The second group that moved hardest from red to blue was people under the age of 40, specifically young men, who for the first time aren't doing as well as their parents were at the same age. That's never happened in American history till now. That's a breakdown in the compact you have. And by the way, when your son isn't doing well, right, it creates rage and shame in the whole household. The whole household comes down, and all they want is disruption. Someone under the age of 40 is 24% less wealthy than they were 40 years ago. Someone over the age of 70 is 72% wealthier. Old people have figured out a way to vote themselves more money. And we keep doing it every year. Now 40% of our budget goes to seniors. It's about to be 50% in 10 years, which crowds out investments in R&D, technology, and education, which are more forward-leaning investments. So young people are just pissed off and they want change. And then the most interesting group that went hardest from blue to red was 45 to 64-year-old women. And my thesis is that's their mothers. Because if your son's in the basement vaping and playing video games, you don't give a shit about territorial sovereignty in Ukraine or transgender rights. You just want disruption. In addition, we have social media that's turning everyone against everyone. Incumbents are being voted out everywhere. And because of the radical, insane narcissism of President Biden, we had to run an incumbent who didn't make it to Iowa the last time she ran. So the Democratic Party, absolute narcissism of President Biden, and this election really about being failing young men. There has been no group in America that has fallen further faster than young men. 4 times as likely to kill themselves, 3 times as likely to be addicted, 12 times as likely to be incarcerated. And what we talk about at the DNC convention, where I last saw you, David, we have every special interest group parading on stage, except no one acknowledges the group that is really struggling, and that's young men. If you go to the DNC website today, dnc.org, it says who we serve, explicitly, who we serve. And it lists 16 demographic groups: Asian Pacific Islanders, veterans, the disabled, Black Americans, Native Americans, and I added it up. It's 74% of the US population. When you say you're actively advocating for 74% of the population, you're not advocating for them. You're discriminating against 26%. And that 26% is young men. So basically, they say young men are moving more conservative. I don't think they're moving to the Republican Party. I think they're moving away from the Democratic Party. And when young men aren't doing well, and this sounds sexist, but the data is there, there's still a lot of women in the nation that primarily vote on what they believe is best for their husbands and their sons. And when young men aren't doing well, you want chaos, you want change. You'll vote for an insurrectionist and a rapist. You just want change. And I think that's what happened. I think that we essentially set ourselves up, we stuck out our chins, and these fists of stone, quite frankly called testosterone, came for it. And what did Trump do? He was brilliant. He flew into the manosphere. Think about it. Rockets, crypto, Joe Rogan. I mean, it just reeked of the manosphere. When he went on Joe Rogan, he got 40 million views on YouTube, 15 million audio downloads. For Vice President Harris, who, by the way, I think she did an incredible job given the hand she was dealt. I think she did exceptional given the hand she was dealt, right? For her to get the same level of awareness and attention that President Trump got just by going on Joe Rogan, she would have had to have gone on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox every night for 3 hours for 2 weeks. But they couldn't figure out a way to get down to Austin. Anyway, I just think we literally figured out a way to lose this. And then, and on the final thing, money in politics, the world's wealthiest man decided who was president, identified the swing districts, weaponized his platform, and poured a bunch of money into it in a very targeted, strategic way. He didn't do anything we haven't done. We're just pissed off because he did it much better.
Just expand on one thing, which is you have a number of charts in this book, which I'm sure could be updated, but these wouldn't have to be what happened to the American economy between from 45 to 70 and then from 70 to date in terms of just economic distribution and how the economy changed as we made the transition to an information economy, because to me that was profound. I mean, it wasn't startling, but when you see the numbers and you consider them, the system has worked a lot better for some people than others. So when folks say, are you going to stand up for democracy and so on? I'm the son of a refugee. I couldn't feel more strongly about it. But I think, and I've said this before, if you're at the kitchen table and you're talking about democracy over the kitchen table, it's probably because you don't have to worry about the cost of the groceries on the kitchen table. So that's been a big shift. The rising tides don't lift all boats.
So we use words like network effects, globalization, information economy to mask over a hard truth, and that is we in our nation have decided consciously, we've made these decisions to cram as much wealth into the top 1% as possible. And America's superpowers are optimism. But the Achilles heel of that optimism is that deep down, most of us believe we're going to be in that 1%. And so when I was in my 30s and 40s, making a good living, kind of mid-six figures. By the way, I talk very openly about money. The gestalt that you're not supposed to talk about money is nothing but rich people trying to keep the middle class and poor down, right? You want to be great at tennis? Talk about tennis. People should talk about money. So when I was in my 30s and 40s, I was making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and my tax rate was about 40%. Now that I'm making millions, sometimes tens of millions, my tax rate is 17%. The two biggest tax deductions in America, mortgage interest rate and capital gains. Who owns homes and stocks? People my age. Who makes their money from salary and current income and rents? People your age. Every year we transfer $1.2 trillion from people your age to old people in the form of Social Security. The wealthiest generation in the history of this planet is getting $1.2 trillion a year from young people. I'm not suggesting we do away with Social Security, but for God's sakes, a third of us should never get it. And absolutely the age limit should be raised. It's insane that we continue to transfer so much money from young to old. And we purposely do this, and from poor to rich. Now you would argue, okay, it's not the poor. The poor pay very, very little tax, less than 50%. Their taxes have stayed about the same. If you want to talk about who really gets screwed in our tax code, it's what I call the workhorses. Mom's a baller at a law firm, making 800 grand a year. Dad's a chiropractor, he's got a thriving practice, makes 600 grand a year. They make $1.4 million. In order to make that money, they have to probably live in a blue state, and they're probably paying, because it's all current income, between 47 and 52% a year in taxes. But if Dad figures out a way to make the jump to light speed and sell his chiropractic clinic to private equity and become from a super earner to a super owner, his tax rate plummets. And we have purposely created a tax code that's gone from 400 pages to 4,000. And those 3,600 pages are there to screw the middle class by virtue of giving guys like me ridiculous tax credits. When I sold my last company for $160 million in 2017, the first $10 million was tax-free. Does that make any sense? I made another investment, VC investment. I invested $2.5 million. I got $75 million. First $25 million tax-free. Does that make any sense? And when I testify or when I talk in front of the Small Business Committee and say, okay, that makes no sense. I said, we need entrepreneurs to be incented to go out and make more money. No entrepreneur knows anything about the tax rates when they start a company. That's not why we start companies. But we have very effective lobbyists and we have wealthy people who have weaponized government figuring out a way to cram more and more income into the top 1%, because the bottom 99 still believe they're going to be in that top 1%, and the 1% are much more organized.
Let me ask you a question, though. You say we have decided, and it seems to me that's a little bit, I think so much happens. I think there's a suspicion among a lot of voters. We did a poll for the Institute of Politics, about the same time your book appeared, and there was an agree-disagree question in there. It was for a thing we were doing on disinformation, and the question said, the government is corrupt and rigged against people like me. Agree or disagree? And 56% of Americans agree.
Yeah.
So it's not like people don't suspect that the system is skewed by lobbyists and money and all of that, but they, the question is, how did they come to associate? How did they come to find Trump as their solution to that problem?
I think he's stabbing him in the front instead of stabbing him in the back. I think the cohort I'm most disappointed in is wealthy Democrats. There's a conspiracy right now where, for the first time, we've taken away rights. The Kingdom of South America is on a better trajectory with respect to women's rights in America right now. But basically, very, very wealthy Democrats are complaining at dinner about what's going on, and they're not speaking out because they've uploaded their W-2s to ChatGPT and just figured out they're going to get much wealthier with Trump's tax cuts. And the people who are going to have to pay for it are the $800 billion a year increase in deficit. And one of the things, and you're a genius at this, we need to do a better messaging around, is deficit is nothing but taxes on young people. And so very wealthy Democrats are like, oh no, stop, it hurts so good. So I think this is a conspiracy among the 1% who, quite frankly, are willing to kind of stay quiet because the deal is, just be quiet. Don't get that angry. Don't weaponize your platform against me. Because guess what? The really powerful in this country are all getting richer and richer, including Democrats. This is very simple. The wealthy are going to get much wealthier under President Trump, both Republicans and Democrats. So the most powerful among us in the Democratic Party are not fighting with the same gusto we should be.
Yeah, so this is, I think, what a lot of voters suspect, right? That they condemn both parties for the changes, policy changes that have conspired against them for, the Social Security thing's just a bit more, I agree with you that if you don't need it, I've always felt this way, if you don't need it, then, why do you get it? But we can have that discussion. But there is this sense that both parties are kind of conspiring to, in this kind of corrupt system. So the question is, you're in charge of the Democratic Party.
Sure.
For your sins.
Yeah.
What do you think the Democratic Party should do?
Well, I think we need to be the party. I think we need to stop being the party of indignance right now and the party of big ideas. And that is, for me, I think you need a big message that helps everyone understand very simply what we're about. And this is my best attempt at a big message. I call it the unifying theory of everything. And for me, that's love and prosperity. Now, stay with me before I sound too out there. I think the most rewarding, what's the purpose of all this? What's the purpose for working hard, coming to school, getting the right certification, moving to a city? Everything you want to do kind of adds up to wanting to have meaning and purpose in your life, or kind of, quote unquote, to be happy. I think the greatest vehicle for happiness, and I didn't recognize this till I was older, is quite frankly, is having the opportunity to partner with someone and have children. That, at least for me, and I think for most people, that's where I have found purpose. And I think the most prosperous nation in the world should be pretty easily able to figure out a way to say, young people, we're going to give you venues and opportunities to meet each other and fall in love. Mandatory national service, more freshman seats, more economically viable young people vocational programming, tax holiday for people under the age of 40, similar to what they're doing in Portugal, more bars. I think you should drink more. I think the second worst thing to happen to young people behind the remote work is this anti-alcohol movement. I'm being serious. I'm not suggesting that I think everyone should do an audit of all their substances. But I think if you do an honest audit, the most rewarding thing, I know you, but I don't know you well. I would bet the most rewarding thing in your life is these close, deep relationships you have with your partner and your kids.
Without question.
And I then ask people...
I don't know about her, but that's the way I feel.
And then your friends. And then I ask people, what role did alcohol play in the formation of those relationships? And they all kind of nod and laugh. And it's a lot. We need more opportunities, and I'm not just saying just bars, sports clubs, nonprofits, religious institutions, work, tax-free status for anyone that gets people together under the age of 40, right? I think online dating has been a disaster. We need opportunities for young people to meet, quite frankly, for young men to demonstrate excellence, because women have a much finer filter for choosing mating because sex has so much downside for them than it does for men. Where does a man demonstrate excellence now? Not going into work. Where does he demonstrate excellence? The young people aren't getting together. So we need venues and opportunities. I was just in Israel, met with the IDF, a battalion from the IDF, all these young, beautiful, fit men and women outside all day. That's where they find mentors, it's where they find co-founders, it's where they find mates. By the way, some of the lowest levels of young adult depression in the world are in Israel, despite their existential threats, because I believe they serve in the agency of something bigger than themselves. I think we need mandatory national service. And then once you are fortunate enough to find someone to mate with and have kids, you should absolutely, at a minimum, be able to afford to have housing and a certain level of prosperity. $25 an hour minimum wage. If minimum wage had just kept pace with productivity and inflation for the last 40 years, it'd be somewhere between $23 and $27 an hour. 7 million new homes, manufactured homes, which cost 30 to 50% less than building on site, and federal legislation against all of this NIMBYism that gets in the way of housing permits, see above rejectionist culture. 7 million new homes, right? Bring down the cost of housing, do away with the tax-free status, more freshman seats, to encourage larger enrollments, such that in America, the most prosperous nation in the world, where we had $1/3 trillion in an earnings call 5 minutes after their earnings, NVIDIA, at a minimum, anyone under the age of 40, right, should be able to find someone, fall in love, and have kids, and not live in poverty. That, to me, sounds pretty fucking basic. Pretty basic for the most prosperous nation in the history of the planet. And everything the Democratic Party should do, in my opinion, should reverse engineer tax, economic, and social policy from a love and prosperity. That is table stakes. Table stakes. And unfortunately in America, it is no longer. 40% of American households have medical or dental debt. 1 in 3 men under the age of 30 hasn't had sex in the last year. 60% of 30-year-olds used to have a child in the house. Now it's 27%. If young people decided they don't want families, or they just can't afford them, or find someone they want to mate with, women can't find an economically or emotionally viable man. I mean, these are real issues. For me, the Democratic Party is about, okay, love and prosperity. Everyone should be able to have that level of deep and meaningful relationship.
Speaking of love, you mentioned something earlier about the podcast and the election and so on. I want to talk about both podcasts and social media generally, but you know so much about the tech world. I want to ask you in a minute about Elon Musk and some of the tech bros who are flexing right now. But the whole, and you write a little about this, but the whole business model of social media is to keep people online, and their conclusion is the best way to keep people online is anger, resentment, conspiracy theories, drive people into their silos. It seems like it is the enemy of community.
Yeah, so my first firm, I started a firm when I was 26 called Profit Brand Strategy. That was a brand strategy, or is a brand strategy firm. And from 1945 to 1995, the algorithm for making or producing shareholder value was the following. Come up with a mediocre product, a mediocre shoe, mediocre car, mediocre salty snack, mediocre sugary drink, and then wrap it in these amazing brand codes of European elegance or American toughness or masculinity or maternal love, and you can turn 20 cents of toothpaste, peanut butter paste into $3 of maternal love, because choosy moms choose Jif, right? But the ultimate association to create unearned margin and shareholder value was sex. We thought sex sells, right? Drink this beer and you'll be hotter, right? Wear this watch and you'll be more attractive as a potential mate. And what we found with the introduction of the Google algorithm was we found something even better than sex, and it's rage. Think about if someone says something that disagrees with you in a comment section on YouTube or on Instagram, you got to go back and check it out. It's the comments and the rage. So the algorithms purposely elevate controversial incendiary content. I want to be clear. If you believe mRNA vaccines alter your DNA, I think you should have the right to say that. But unfortunately, we now have a profit motive and giving that statement more sunlight and reach than it would on its own, because it creates a fight online. So we essentially have the world's deepest pocketed companies are trying to do one of two things: enrage you and divide us, or two, give young men the myth, the mythology, the falsehood that they can have a reasonable facsimile of life online. Why go through the pain of getting friends when you have Reddit and Discord? Why put on a tie? Why go into an office? Why go through the exceptional injustice of the corporate world? You can make money trading crypto or buying stocks on Robinhood. Why go through the humiliation, the effort, the drama, the persistence, the resilience of trying to establish a romantic relationship when you have porn? So what we have is the world's most deep-pocketed firms in the world with the greatest concentration of IQ since NASA are trying to do one of two things. Convince people they can have a reasonable facsimile of life alone. I believe we're developing a new species of asocial, asexual male, and I think it's terrible. And people say, well, they're mass shooters, they're dangerous. They're actually more dangerous to themselves than to anybody else, but they become more prone to misogynistic content, they become more prone to nationalistic content, they become less likely to believe in climate change, and some they become shitty citizens, and we're producing millions of them. And then the secondary point of this is we all get angry at each other. Supposedly the number of people who talk to their neighbors has been cut in half, because if they put up a sign that says Trump, you don't like him anymore, you don't want to talk to him, you're not inviting them over for dinner. So we're not talking to each other, we're not getting along, there's no comity of man. And also, and I'm paranoid, but this doesn't mean I'm wrong. If I couldn't beat America kinetically, militarily, I couldn't beat them economically, I'm Russia or I'm China, but I have a strategic imperative in depositioning and weakening them, I got an idea. Let's just get them to hate each other. The call is...
I don't think that's paranoid. I think that's actually happening.
There's data. If you go on TikTok, and this data's old, it's now 2 months, I haven't seen the data since 2 months ago, there are 54 pro-Hamas videos for every pro-Israel video being served on TikTok, right? Some of that is probably organic. Young people are more, for whatever you want to call it, sympathetic to the rights of Palestinians, but it's not 54-1. I think that CCP says, divide them, figure out a way to get them arguing, figure out a way to get young people disagreeing with old people in America, figure out a way to enrage people, get them arguing with each other. And they'll be so focused on that and so angry, they'll be totally divided, they'll be weak, they'll make stupid decisions, they'll elect people who are extremely nationalist. Maybe they'll elect somebody that opens a Swiss bank account that we can put money in and nobody knows but him in exchange for withdrawing from Ukraine. That's called the Trump coin, by the way, folks. That is such incredible grift. Such incredible grift. Anyways, I absolutely think these firms, there's more regulation in this podium than there is in big tech right now. That's a true statement. The plastic, everything that they had to figure out here, there's more regulation than there is in big tech. So these firms are absolutely, and by the way, I like these firms, I know them, I've made a lot of money from them, I think they do a great job, but our inability to elect people who understand these technologies and are willing to regulate them, such that a 14-year-old doesn't spend...
Well, didn't we come to this, we saw this close up in the winter. In December, there was a bill that was bipartisan, passed by the Senate to try and provide some regulation to protect younger people.
COSA, Kid Online Stuff,
and it was killed by the Speaker of the House after one of the tech companies, maybe it was Meta, agreed to put an AI center close to his district. The question is, I guess, because now that you've bummed everybody out.
Yeah, I apologize. I promise I'll end optimistically.
But what is the answer to that? Because the tech companies are leveraging such enormous power. And by the way, those algorithms that send us into these dark holes are proprietary. We don't even know them. We don't know how to analyze them because we're not allowed to see them.
One of the great weapons of the incumbents is the illusion of complexity. See above, global trade, agility, whatever you want to call it, for why we have crammed more and more money. Corporations are paying less taxes since 1939. That's a decision we've made. We could fix a lot of this problem. All algorithmically elevated content, you remove 230 protection. Right now, if in this podcast or whatever we're doing could be reverse engineered to a 60% increase in self-harm among teen girls, we would stop doing these under threat of lawsuit. Not on Meta. Fox News says that Smartmatic and Dominion voting machines were weaponized by Hugo Chavez. And they knew that was a lie, or by Venezuelans. They knew it was a lie, but they told their anchors to say it anyway. So they get sued for defamation and slander, and the courts say, you knew this was a lie, you did it, it hurt the company, they get fined $750 million. That was a dumpster fire compared to what happened on Meta, the nuclear mushroom cloud of misinformation of Meta around voting irregularities. But big tech firms, since 1997, have had no liability. So you remove that liability shield, you can make an argument that it's a bulletin board and people should be able to say what they want, and they can't be responsible because there's literally a billion things going up every 7 seconds. I get that. I don't want to do away with these firms. They're hugely economically prosperous for us. They hire a lot of you. It's a great thing. I own their stock. They're great. But if you elevate content just because it divides people, then it no longer has 230 protection. Any algorithmically elevated content is no longer shielded by 230. You age gate. Anyone under the age of 16 can't be on social media. There's just no reason for anyone under the age of 16 to be on social media. The average 14-year-old male in America is spending 17 hours a week on TikTok. TikTok now has more command of attention of people under the age of 25 than CBS, ABC, and NBC did in the 60s. Would we have let the Kremlin own those stations? No one under the age of 16, and then I think we need massive antitrust. I think antitrust would oxygenate the economy. Within Alphabet, Meta, and either Apple or, I don't know, Amazon, there's 16 to 20 amazing companies. More competition, lower rents. Every year, Amazon used to take 25% of gross proceeds from third-party retailers on the platform. Now it's 45% because they have a monopoly. It's 50%. Google search terms, for those of you that buy them for your business, have seen rents go up. Think about how much rents have skyrocketed from the company that controls 2/3 of all social media. Think of the rents parents are paying for social media. P&G and parents would love a social media platform that figures out a way not to get their kid seeing total misinformation. But there's not enough competition. Anyways.
We're going to take some questions in just a few minutes, and I should know this. Where's the microphone going to be? On either side here. We're going to prioritize students first, so no sneaking to the front of the line, you people who are young at heart. But I want to ask you. You mentioned TikTok. President hated TikTok in his last term.
Yeah.
And then he's very explicit. He's very open about this. He said, "Then I learned how much it helped me in the election."
Yeah.
And I love TikTok now. Held up the legislation that would have prevented, would have forced the Chinese to essentially sell the company. Now he wants a partnership, and they're going to have a lot to say about who that partner is. Does that worry you that the president has that much influence over the ownership of a social media site that has such influence, particularly with Americans under 40?
There's so many. A big tactic in the GRU is flood the zone with so many outrageous things that the opposition is flat-footed. That's what we're in right now. We're flat-footed. This is like number 9 on the list, and it's absolutely insane. First off, there needs to be a separation of church and state. There also needs to be a separation of business and state. And that is, you don't have the president making one-off deals with a company and punishing or rewarding or having a used car sale on the White House lawn. You just don't do that because it creates corruption. And the incentives are, we'll just give them money, or just, now law firms are saying they're going to work for free for these people because they don't want to be targeted by them. That's pure corruption. The reason that probably India isn't the economic power, hasn't kept pace with China, is the level of corruption. Right? China on a regular basis hangs or executes people, and there's not nearly as much corruption at a government level as there is in India. The fact that the president is now trying to carve up TikTok and is going back and forth. If you were China and the president signed an executive order and it was passed overwhelmingly in a bipartisan vote to ban TikTok, and then on the eve of the ban, the president says, "No, just kidding. Just keep doing it." Would you take anything we say seriously? Would you back down on anything? So we have just no credibility with the CCP on any trade issue right now. And let me list, you just want to talk about a basic for why we should ban TikTok, just a basic fundamental trade asymmetry, right? If they won't let Tesla or GM into their country, we say we're not going to let BYD in. Fine, you have to have a certain level of trade movement. I am now going to list all of the American media companies in China. Next question.
Speaking of trade,
Trade.
tomorrow the president's going to announce his golden age tariffs.
Yep.
He got elected on a platform of lowering costs. A lot of economists believe it's going to have the opposite effect. What do you feel is motivating him to promote? Why is he so wedded to the idea of tariffs, which will be the highest we've seen in generations?
I can't speak to his, people say he's obsessed with McKinley. I can't speak to his motivation. What I can speak to with confidence is that it would be difficult to find a more elegant way to reduce the prosperity of Americans than tariffs. I taught micro and macroeconomics in graduate school at Berkeley, and we used to talk about tariffs the way I imagine they talk about leeches in medical school now. And that is, we used to do an entire class on, can you get over the fact they did this? I want to be clear, tariffs can be used strategically to restore trade asymmetry. All right, you're doing this, we're going to put on a tariff until there's some equilibrium here. They can be used, and there's an argument, to protect some key strategic industries. We should probably have some level of domestic steel production in case we go to war. I get it. But blanket tariffs are just the fastest way to reduce prosperity. This notion, if you wanted to increase our prices and also decrease demand of our products abroad, tariffs are the way to go. And I teach strategy at the business school at NYU. And strategy, the two questions you always want to ask yourself. One, strategy basically comes down to one question. What can we do that's really hard? Different talk show. But also the key mistake in strategy is assume, you see how my nose goes to the right? My nose goes to the right. And this, hold with me, there's a story here. When I first got to New York, I was bored and stressed, so I started boxing. And this guy who I paid to box with me said I should enter a boxing tournament. And I was dumb enough to believe that I could box. And I got in the ring with a guy who was 5'8", I'm 190 pounds. He was 5'8", 190 pounds, and 25, not 45. And all I remember was ding. That's all I remember. Ding. And my nose still hasn't gone back to where it's supposed to go. Because I made the key mistake in strategy, and that is I believed I was boxing against a speedback or someone who would be nice to me. And that is the key mistake in tariffs, is people believe that they're operating in a vacuum. Every single tariff we have levied has been met with a reciprocal tariff, meaning that all of a sudden our products are going to become more expensive overseas. And here's the thing that hasn't been talked about that makes these tariffs so incredibly more punishing. Two things, actually. One is the uncertainty. Companies don't even know how to plan their business right now. They're in a state of paralysis. The tariffs are on, the tariffs are off. If the tariffs went off 25%, that'd be bad. But at least General Motors could plan their business. Right now, they don't know how to plan their business. And then the thing they're not talking about is the following. The majority of our exports are services, right? Meta is a huge exporter. Investment banking, right? High-end products, media. The margin on the products we export are exponentially higher than the imports we bring in. So people import, German imports in Mercedes at about 7 to 10% of profit margins. We export NVIDIA H55 chips that have about 55% margins. So for every dollar we create in our exports, we're getting 3, 5, 10 times that value in terms of shareholder value that creates wealth and creates tax revenue. And they're getting usually somewhere between 1 and 3. So for every dollar reduction in economic growth we're getting from these ridiculous tariffs, we're actually losing exponentially more in terms of shareholder value. These are, it is difficult to think of a way, if he said, I really need to figure out a way to put us into stagflation, well, let's convince people that tariffs will be punching against a speed bag and we'll get the tariff revenue, it'll create more jobs, and they won't respond, they won't hit back. And talk about strategic. Europe and Canada and Mexico are now talking about coordinating, and I love this, and creating 2 levels of tariffs, and the most disproportionately onerous tariffs on the red states. They're going to go after their hearts and lungs because they're smarter. Tariffs are literally the fastest way to reduce prosperity for this nation. They make absolutely no sense, and we're going to pay a huge price. And even if we decided to do away with them tomorrow, a lot of the damage has been done because we look inconsistent, we look like amateurs. And what's happening behind the scenes? I've worked with 30 of the 100 biggest global nationals in the world in the last 10 years. They're all reconfiguring their supply chains and going around America. Like, we don't know what's going on there. We can't build a business getting supplies or whatever it might be, high-end products from the US, so we are reconfiguring our supply chains to bypass and work around America. That will have impact on us for 10 or 20 or 30 years because we now have a reputation of not only being dumb, but being inconsistent. They just don't know what to expect from us.
Got a student question over there. We can't actually see you because of the lights, but describe yourself to us.
Hello, my name's Martin. I'm a first-year student here, and I have 2 quick questions. What's the best advice that has ever been given to you, and why was it the best advice? And what's the best advice you would give to young men in America now?
Best advice I've ever received is nothing's ever as good or as bad as it seems. When you lose somebody, when you get fired, when you have an investment get cut in half, you get your first D, you get your heart broken. When you look back on your life, my colleague at NYU, Adam Alter, who has a joint appointment in the psychology department, he does this great research on end of life. He goes into palliative care, and he interviews people who are days away from death. And he asks them what their biggest regret is. And there's 3. In reverse order, 3rd biggest regret is they wish they'd stayed in better touch with their friends. 2, they wish they'd led the life they wanted to lead, right? Not what their church wanted, not what their family wanted, not what society wanted. They wish they'd danced on tables as if no one was watching, right? Their biggest regret is they wish they'd been less hard on themselves. So when something bad happens to you as a young person, you get your heart broken. You really screw up, you make a big mistake, something bad happens, you screw up and you don't get the job. The thing you're going to regret at the end of your life isn't not getting the job. The thing you're going to regret is how hard on yourself you were. So forgive yourself. Nothing's ever as bad as it seems. And at the same time, when you're killing it, you get into the University of Chicago, you get an internship at Goldman, you're making a shit ton of money. Recognize a lot of that is also not your fault, and be humble. Be humble. Realize a lot of it was luck. And try and create that same type of environment and luck for others. Nothing's ever as good or as bad as it seems. And what was the second one?
What's the best advice you give to a young man in America?
I think that was it, right?
Yeah.
What's the best advice, specifically for young men? This is going to sound crude. I coach a lot of young men. I say, okay, start making some money. You got that down. You're at the University of Chicago. I think that more young men need to get out and take more risks around relationships. I think, and you're probably doing that here.
That's not a question.
We
don't want an answer.
appreciate, make a ton of friends, express admiration, try and be around people as much, figure out a way to express romantic interest while making a woman or another man feel safe. If you want to punch above your weight class, economically and romantically, you need to get to know a lot. If you're not getting a lot of no's, you're never going to get to really wonderful yeses. The reason why I'm as economically secure as I am, and I get to raise kids with such a wonderful partner, is because I was never afraid of no. And 51% of 18 to 24-year-old men have never asked a woman out in person. That is a tragedy. So be fit, be kind, have a plan, and then try and establish as many friendships and as many, I don't want to say as many romantic relationships as possible, but don't be afraid If you aren't getting to know professionally, economically, and romantically, you're never going to get to wonderful yeses. Develop resilience, get out there, get out of the house, meet people, punch above your weight class.
Okay.
Thank you.
I was a student here, and I got lots of no's, and I'm very grateful
And
for it.
look at you now.
Okay. Someone over here.
Hello, my name is Alex Fuentes. I'm a second year at the college. I'm the first in my family to attend university within the United States. And my question for you is about the birth rates. We've seen birth rates fall across all developing nations that have been economically developed within Europe, across Asia. Why do you think the United States could be different? Is it really this barrier of affordability within rent and food? And is it, we've seen, like, for example, I forget if it was Japan or Korea had made a dating app, a government-sponsored dating app. We've seen countless of failures across a variety of nations. So why do you think the United States could be better?
Yeah, so to your point, in South Korea, they've tried all of these programs, and only 14% of South Koreans are ever going to have a grandkid at current birth rates. And a lot of people would argue it's not only economic, it's just cultural. As nations become wealthier and more educated, birth rates go down. So I think it has to be a combination of giving people the economic I think some of it is economic. I think a lot of people are deciding, I think it's a few things. One, people don't have the money to have kids, or they have fewer kids. Two, I think there's fewer economically and emotionally viable men that women would contemplate as mates. And I also think there's just a dramatic amount of again, it just comes back to money for me. I think we got to put more money in young people's pockets. I think we have to make men, quite frankly, more attractive to women. The greatest innovation in history is not the iPhone or the semiconductor. The greatest innovation in history is the US middle class. And the rich will have you believe it's a naturally occurring organism, that it'll just happen on its own if we let the free market happen. No, it doesn't. You have to let me use the R word. You have to constantly redistribute money from the richest and corporations to the middle class, or it dies. It goes out of business. And at the end of World War II, we brought home 7 million men who had demonstrated heroism in uniform, and they were very attractive to potential mates, and we put money in their pockets through the GI Bill, through the National Highway Construction Act, right, through lower interest mortgages, and they mated like crazy. And then people had such wonderful homes and such wonderful lives that they decided, why wouldn't we bring women into this prosperity? Why wouldn't we bring non-whites into this prosperity? And we created the greatest nation in the world. And right now, what we're missing, quite frankly, is economically and emotionally viable young men that people want to partner with. I think a lot of our problems reverse engineer to that. And the moment you start even having a conversation, people get uncomfortable. Well, why are you so worried about men? Where were you for the last 3,000 years with women? And I want to also acknowledge that people of our generation had the most dramatic amount of prosperity in history from 1945 to 1995 crammed into 30% of us that happen to be white and male. And so, quite frankly, there's a gag reflex now around giving it any sort of programs or empathy for young men. And the thing is, empathy is not a zero-sum game. Civil rights didn't hurt white people. Gay marriage didn't hurt heteronormative marriage. And we have to acknowledge young men are doing really poorly. More single women own homes than single men. Fine, right? 2 in 3 women under the age of 30 is in a relationship. Only 1 in 3 men. Why? You think that's impossible? It's because women are dating older. Women in urban centers are now making more money than men. That's fine. We should do nothing to get in the way of that. That's a collective victory. But we also have to acknowledge is the following. Women made horizontally and up, men horizontally and down socioeconomically. And when the pool of horizontal and up for men keeps shrinking, you're just going to have less household formation. And in my view, you're going to have less purpose and less meaning in people's lives. So the question is, how do we, and I don't believe you should have programs, I think there's a few programs such as starting boys later in primary education, getting more males in primary education. But for the most part, I think our program should be focused on people just leveling up young people. Because I don't want it to become a political kind of battle of the sexes. But I do think if we give young people dramatically more opportunity and reverse the flow of capital and prosperity from young to old, that I believe that you're going to see a vast increase in birth rates. I think much, if not most of this is economic. But your point is a good one, because in some Northern European nations where they've had all sorts of economic programs for young people, you still see the decline in birth rates. This is a long-winded way of saying that's a very good question, and I don't have a full answer for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm glad you didn't, because we got other questions here. Go ahead.
Hey, Prof G, thanks for being here. My name is Luke Johnson. I'm a master's student in the Precision Health program and alum of the college. I want to thank you for a conversation you had on Andrew Yang's podcast in 2020, because it encouraged me to take a year off from college and get some work experience instead of doing online classes. Thinking about politics and Andrew Yang, he has since started the Forward Party, a third party. He advocates for ranked choice voting and open primaries and doing things to make third parties more viable in the U.S. I'm just curious if you, what your thoughts are on the Forward Party. You know, you're a moderate guy, Andrew Yang's a moderate. Any thoughts on third parties looking at our political future?
So I'll start and then David should finish, because he's going to forget more about this. I'm going to know. It makes sense in theory. Third parties usually don't work. And for me, the third party is the next evolution of the Democratic Party. I'm doubling down on the Democratic Party. And I think that when I think about the Democratic Party, I think our heart's in the right place, and that's good enough for me. And we're trying to do the right thing. And I think that what we need is a series of big, bold ideas to get to the next stage. Clear out some of the deadwood, the majority of our senators in Congress, not the majority. Majority of the senators, not the majority of Congress people. But I think there's a bench of Democratic politicians who are outstanding. And I think we need to move to some big, bold ideas, right? National service, 7 million homes. I just think there's flat tax rate. And I just think there's a series of big ideas that we could propose that are more. I just think a third party is probably going to make it even worse for us. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that I don't see that as the emerging answer, although I do think there are Republicans who feel homeless right now, who are looking for a place. But your other question was about structural changes, ranked choice voting, universal primaries, that do tend to moderate the outcome of that election, give voice to people who don't participate in party primaries. The problem with those is they require politicians at the state level. Sometimes you can do it by initiative, and in the states where you can, often they do. Most states don't allow that, and most politicians aren't going to embrace a system that makes their office holding more tenuous, their hold on office more tenuous. So it's an uphill fight, but I think that has some promise. But I just want to agree with one thing Scott said. I think my advice, if I were asked to the Democratic Party, would be don't be the party of restoration. Don't be the party of the status quo. Don't say we need to win to restore everything that Trump is dismantling, because Washington needed an angioplasty. Okay, they just didn't need a heart attack. And I think that the smart candidate is going to say, how do we achieve the goals that we care about? How do we pursue the values that we care about in a way that is not as freighted as the thing we left behind, not as bureaucratic, not as subject to corruption? I think it's really, that's the right way to think about this. It's a terrible, there's going to be a big blast radius from what's going on right now, but there's also going to be, after teardowns, you have an opportunity to build something new. And the question is, what does that look like? And I think Democrats should be talking about that. Clearly fighting the things they think are wrong, but also thinking about why it is that so many people drifted away, and how do you win people back? And it's by being a more forward-looking version of yourself. Yes?
Hey, Prof G. My name is Arthur. I'm a second year, big fan of the podcast. I wanted to ask you, a lot of my friends say that beyond economic issues, Republicans make them feel proud of being men. How specifically can Democrats make young men feel the same way without alienating so much of the current Democratic coalition?
Well, the first is to just see them. The Democratic National Convention was a parade of every special interest group, but no one acknowledged young men. I think we need to reframe. I literally submitted my manuscript. I'm writing a book on masculinity, and I think that there's an opportunity for a Democrat to say, this is what's, masculinity is such a weird word right now. The right wants to conflate masculinity with coarseness and cruelty. The two role models on the right for masculinity are President Trump and Elon Musk. And because I don't want to miss a chance to bash Elon Musk. This is your role model for masculinity. You have someone who's concurrently being sued by two women for sole custody of their children because he hasn't seen them. That's what it means to be a man. You become the wealthiest man in the world such that you can start accusing your employees of sex crimes such that they have to move out of their house, accusing a cave diver of trying to save young men of a sex crime, of cutting benefits in a reckless, wanton manner from kids and veterans. That's what it means to be a man. So I think there's an opportunity for someone to step in and embrace masculinity from the left and say, there's no such thing as toxic masculinity. That's like saying toxic kindness. There's violence, there's an abuse of power. But masculinity is a wonderful thing. It means to provide. I still think every man should start his family by saying, I'm going to take economic responsibility for my household. And sometimes that means getting out of the way when your partner is better at that whole money thing and being more supportive of her, right? But I think you start from a point of, I'm going to be a provider. 2, protector. Your default operating system is that you protect. You don't need to understand the transgender community. You may not even agree with them. But when you see them being demonized, your default as a man is protection, right? Who breaks up fights at bars? Big, strong men. Who defends our country, right? Big, strong men and women. And by the way, I think a lot of women demonstrate wonderful masculinity, just as a lot of men demonstrate wonderful femininity. But let's embrace masculinity. And then finally, you're a provider, you're a protector, and you're a procreator. You approach people, you're aggressive. You express friendship. You express admiration. You express romantic interest while making people feel safe. You want to have kids. I think that's a wonderful thing. Let's embrace and create a more positive symbol of masculinity from the left. Because the left is bad, while the right is saying masculinity is coarseness and cruelty and male abandonment, the left says masculinity is act more like a woman. That's not right either. So I think there's a big opportunity for someone, a Democrat, to just stand up and say, it's wonderful to be masculine, and we need to embrace that, and we need to celebrate our young men and stop this notion that somehow, this default notion that they're guilty of something because of the prosperity that we recognized, that somehow a 19-year-old shouldn't have empathy. So I think there's a huge opportunity around redefining what it means to be a man and being a little, I don't want to say politically incorrect, but just acknowledge that for the 95% of the population that identifies as binary, which, by the way, to talk about these issues doesn't mean everyone along the spectrum doesn't deserve the exact same level of respect and rights as everybody else, but to also acknowledge that 45% of our population that are binary men have certain attributes that can be guided towards something really positive for the country and for the world, and we should embrace those attributes. There's something called the Carnegie Award, and they literally give an award each year. They give awards to people who save people's lives on the spot while putting themselves in harm's way, literally running into a burning house. And they evaluate every instance. 75 of the 81 last year were given to men. Men are more risk aggressive. I think that's a wonderful thing. And I don't think that diminishes women. Let's embrace masculinity. Let's take it back from the right that has said, being coarse and cruel and aggressive and putting rockets into space and being ridiculously rich, that's masculinity. I think there's a big opportunity for us to embrace what it means to be a man from the left.
None of my business, but I tried to break up a bar fight is probably a better answer to why your nose is headed to the right. But anyway, go ahead.
Hi, thank you all both for being here. My name's Sam. I'm a second year at the university. And this question's kind of already been asked in different forms, but I wanted to hear kind of what you had to think about how you'd envision the messaging to those like young men who are trapped in the manosphere or like chronically online. This really has already been talked about, but just kind of what you think that should look like, again, like in an ideal, maybe not even from political, but just like if I'm talking to my friend, how I should approach that kind of conversation.
So I coach a lot of young men, and I'll just tell you what I do. And by the way, I don't coach any young men in this room, because quite frankly, if you're a young man in this room or a young woman, you're tracking. You don't need. You should be mentoring us. So what I do I coach 3 young men at any given time, and these are young men that are struggling. And the first thing I do is I say, take your phone out. Everyone has advantage. The key to strategy is figuring out what your assets and your advantage are and then deploying them. And I'm like, all right, your advantage as a young person is you have more time than money, but time is capital. So we're going to reallocate that capital to a better return. We're going to invest it more wisely. And I say, we're going to find 12 hours a week in your phone. And I say, unlock your phone. And by the way, I tell them, just so you don't think I'm judging you, I tell people to always invest in low-cost index funds. I buy options every week because I like to gamble. I know it's stupid. I can't help it. Do as I say, not as I do. I also consume porn. It's embarrassing to say that out loud. I modulate it, but I do consume porn. And I tell them that so they unlock their phone. And I find 12 hours to 15 hours, no problem in TikTok, Coinbase, X. It is so easy, YouPorn, to find 12 to 15 hours. And I'm like, we're going to reallocate that to 3 areas, to 3 investments, that amazing capital. We have found a shit ton of capital. This is so exciting. 1, you're going to get really strong. You're going to work out 3 to 4 times a week. The young male form is exceptional. That double twitch muscle, that incredible bone structure, and you pour. My son and I every morning are working out on our college tour, and I'm just getting, the young male form can get so strong and so fast, it's a marvel. And when you get really strong, you're going to be kinder. You're going to be less prone to depression. You're going to be more attracted to other mates. You're going to feel confident about serving other people. Right? We're going to get strong. 2, we got to make some money. If you have a smartphone, you can make some money. Right? Lyft driver, TaskRabbit, because once you get a taste for flesh for money, you start figuring out the economy. You start thinking, well, this is how people make money. This is how they get better tips. This is how people spend money. The way you make a lot of money is you start making a little. My first job was a box boy at $3.25 an hour. I always worked from the age of 13 on. Right? We got to start making some money. And then the third thing is, and I don't think this applies probably, at least twice a week, we're going to put ourselves in the agency of others, right? And we're going to approach strangers. At least twice a week, we're going to put ourselves in a situation where we're working in the agency of something bigger than ourselves. A nonprofit, a church group, softball league. You need to get out of the house. The enemies of young men right now are 1, big tech firms, 2, your house. I think you should always be out of your house. Your professional and economic and romantic possibilities or potential are inversely correlated. And also, if you get a job in office is a feature, not a benefit. And then the last thing, I mentioned this before, I need you to get to know. The exercise I'm trying to do now is I want you to go to someone and express friendship, ask them to go to a ball game, or we'll go watch a game with you, drink a beer. Maybe you find someone that you find attractive, try and use humor, common interests, ask them out for coffee, and this is what you're going to do. The next day you're going to call me, and most likely it's going to be a no, and that's the victory. Because what you realize is even when you get a no, you're both fine. As long as you're respectful, as long as you're nice, that's fine. So anyways, that's how I coach young men. But I don't even need to see you. The fact that you're here, the fact that you're as articulate as you are, you're tracking. And then, well, I see we're wrapping up here. If we want better men, this is a call out to the young men here. The single point of failure in a boy's life when he comes off the track, if you were to reverse engineer it to where boys come off the tracks and their whole life never recover, it's when they lose a male role model. And we have more single-parent households in the US than any nation in the world. We're kind of tied with Sweden. We have a lot of male abandonment. We have family court that's biased against divorced fathers. We have a lot of men, young boys actually, whose first male role model is a prison guard. After-school programs that are disproportionately athletics and coaches are being cut. So what I would suggest is the ultimate expression of masculinity is to get involved in the life of a child that isn't yours. And if you find any single mother at work, any mentorship program, any tutoring of high schools, I know you guys do a lot of this, that is the most important expression of masculinity, is to say, I have my act so together, I can take care of myself, I can take care of my family, and I'm going to start taking care and providing love and care for people who aren't mine. And the problem is Michael Jackson and the Catholic Church have screwed it up for all of us, because there's an impression now that if you want to get involved in a 15-year-old boy's life, that there's something wrong with you. There isn't. It is a wonderful thing. In some, and you don't have to be a baller, you don't have to be rich, you don't have to have a degree in adolescent psychology, you just have to be a man trying to live a virtuous life. And when you show up for a 15-year-old, that boy starts believing he has worth. In some, if we want better men, we have to be better men.
Thank you, Scott. He writes a blog. He's got, I think, 17 podcasts a week. He's ubiquitous and always interesting. So I encourage you to follow Scott. And I just want to say on Thursday, in my never-ending quest to draw out shy and reticent public figures, I'll be talking to James Carville over at Bond Chapel, along with Liz Smith, who's a great and incisive young political strategist. So I hope some of you will see us there. But this has been great.
Thank you,
so appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Thank you, everybody.